Thanks, Dean, for teeing me up perfectly. I'm going to build on what he talked about. So I'm a sociologist, and I work with all kinds of scientific groups helping build teams, but also thinking about how do we build more effective strategies for change. So a couple years ago, I was with a group meeting of women, and we were going around and sharing, and someone asked me, they said, if money were no option, no object, what would you change about your life? And I said, nothing. I would change nothing. I get paid to help people figure out how to transform the world. So it's a great delight to be here with you guys, and hopefully this wisdom will help you make better change in the world too. So as a social scientist, I want to talk first about the importance of one of the most underlooked components that influences us in the world, which is our social context. We have a cultural bias towards thinking that the biggest predictor of behavior is people's individual psychology and their individual traits, but in fact, it is the context and the systems that they are embedded in. And if we can understand those contexts and systems better, we can understand the leverage points for change. So the first orienting thing I want you to think about, and this is going to be the beginning and the frame for everything we do. Human beings and their action are always nested in systems. Where almost all the work that we're trying to do in the world, we are trying to change places. People are embedded in the natural environment of the place that they're located in, the built environment, and also the social networks and all of the social structures that they're in. So if we're not thinking about those and attending to them, our opportunity for change is limited. I'm going to take an idea from the public health world and translate it today into thinking about engineering solutions. So many of you, anybody in here worked in the field of public health, knows the social-ecological model? Is this familiar to anybody? All right, we got a couple hands up. So the basic philosophy here is thinking about the levels of human interaction and how they shift people. So individuals are at the center, and as I said before, our bias is towards thinking about everything at the individual level. How do we change individuals? How do we get individuals to change their behavior? And that suggests that we think only about psychology and about persuasion. It doesn't encourage us to understand that all of these other levels are, in fact, influencers and opportunities for change. They might even be bigger levers for change. So we need to be thinking about our interpersonal relationships and social networks and interactions. What is happening in organizations, right? The barrier for the innovation in MRIs is not individual people. It's the decision-making process inside organizations. It's how organizations operate. It's the siloing of knowledge in organizations that prevents hospitals from seeing that MRIs are a good decision, not just for people, but financially. So we're going to take this and translate it out of public health and into other things. If the button works. All right. How many of you are familiar with this, the systems thinking iceberg? Okay, more of you than the social-ecological model. So normally we're thinking about events and we're trying to find solutions for that stuff that's on the tip of the iceberg, right? Whether we're thinking about ecological problems or whether we're thinking about economic insecurity, we're thinking about those events. Now, how does systems thinking and understanding social systems help us get leverage on places to make change? So the first is thinking about patterns of behavior. What are behaviors, processes, and routines? So that slide I just showed a minute ago on the social-ecological model, this is really this layer. And this layer is much more than just individual choices, people making decisions by themselves in isolation. It is people making decisions in their social groups, in their communities, in their families, being influenced by others in their organizations. So just thinking about this layer by itself is a multi-layer system of human influence. So I know I just added even more complexity to already a complex idea about systems thinking. So this is what I want to say about social science. Engineers call me all the time and say, hey Jen, we're working on a project. We need you as social scientists. And I say, okay, maybe I'll have time for you, but you probably need a bunch of other social scientists. So if we think about these layers from individuals up to society, every one of these layers has multiple social science disciplines that are thinking about these topics and that understand the theoretical perspectives about the potential for influence at this level. So when we're thinking about issues and problems, and we think about a systematic approach to addressing them, whatever our objective is out there, whether it's new MRI machines or whether it's really taking action on global warming, we need to understand the interactiveness of the layers. And the first is that every single layer has a whole set of social theories about how that layer operates and what are the levers for influence inside that layer. So in the individual layer, the fields of sociology and psychology and communication studies all have something to say about this. When we're thinking about small groups, people who study social networks understand a lot about that. The field of organizational studies, of organizational psychology, of sociology, all have influence. So there are multiple disciplines about each of these. While each layer has its own distinct influence on whatever objective it is that you're out there that you're interested in, they also are influencing each other. And of the dozens of social programs and social change efforts I've worked on, they fail not because we don't understand one of the layers, but because most projects are conceived of being solvable at a single layer. And people miss the interaction between the layers, and they do not put their intention and attention and opportunity into that. So I'll give you a quick example. Rocky Mountain National Park wanted to increase their recycling rate. They did a big waste audit, and they found a third of their waste was compost, a third was recycling, and a third was trash. So they hired some students to develop something, and the student came to me and said, "Hey, Dr. Cross, I want to do education." And I said, "I will not be on your committee. Education fails. If you want to do community-based social marketing, which is a proven strategy to change individual behavior, I'll be on your committee." So he went and read a book, and 48 hours later he came back and he said, "Oh, you're right, Dr. Cross, let's do that." And I said, "Okay, I'll help you." So then they created a model to reduce waste at the biggest location, which are the family campgrounds. And he built bags and did all of the things that we needed. But two of the most important things for increasing recycling, and this is based on 25 or 30 years of data, is that you have to get the trash can and the recycling can right next to each other. So in your office, in your hospital, on your campus, you'll see those waste bins right next to each other. Well, what does that look like at a campsite? What it looks like at a campsite is people hang their trash bag, and then they carry their recycling in their hand to the recycle bins at the big dump site. And the recycling dumpster is like this big, and the trash dumpster is like this big. And so the environment gives people the clue that there's a lot more trash than there is recycling, but we know that they're both a third of the waste stream. So the first is getting the organization to change its dumpsters, which requires changing their financial contract with their waste hauler, so that what looked like an individual choice and choice architecture or single behavior community-based social marketing would solve it actually required changing financial relationships between the park and their waste hauler. Second, if you want to get those two bins next to each other, which the research in recycling tells us is what maximizes your recycling rates, that would require having hooks on the ends of the picnic tables, one labeled trash, one labeled recycling, and giving people a bag that says recycling, because people think and bring a trash bag, but they don't bring a recycling bag to sort their recyclables. So we gave them reusable grocery bags that said Rocky Mountain Recycles, and we're all prepared to hang them, and then ops told us, nah, we don't really want to put hooks on the picnic tables. That's not part of our plan. So we faced two organizational barriers: what operations and maintenance was willing to do, and what the people who contract with trash haulers were willing to do. And so when people designed that program, they thought, oh, this is just about individual change. How do we get campers to recycle? But the real problem is how do we get the whole organization to adopt all of the relationships required to maximize recycling. So this is a story about the interconnectivity across the layers. There are theories and knowledge and strategies, but if you don't begin by knowing that you need a multi-layer solution, you will not find it, and you will fail. And then people will say, social marketing doesn't work, when it does. It's organizational change that's really tough. So we talked about behaviors, now we're thinking about system structure. So the next layer down is regulations, policies, markets, organizations. I think these are the toughest to change. And this model of systems thinking actually, in fact, tells us that as we go down, it's harder to see them, they're harder to change, but they're also bigger and more powerful leverage points. So if we add those, this is the same graphic we had a minute ago, it's just adding 2 more layers on the top. So adding markets, which are an opportunity for change. So if we change the recycling market, then we might be able to help foster change in organizations. Changing policy and governance are also some of the most impactful tools. In my city, the city of Fort Collins, which has one of the best recycling rates in a state that does not have very good recycling rates, my city worked with the trash haulers, and it costs me more money if I want a bigger trash can. My trash hauler gives me a trash can that is half the size of my recycling can. They only pick up my recycling every other week. They pick up my trash once a week so that those two streams are relatively even, but they charge me more if I want a bigger trash can. Then I moved out into the county, no longer in the bright city of Fort Collins, and in the county, they charge me if I want a bigger recycling can. So those times of year when my recycling is overflowing and I still get it only picked up every other week, I just dump all my recycling into the trash because that's my social context. It's not about how much I value it. It's not about how much I care about it. It's about the context in which I'm in and how those other structures influence my behavior. So no informational campaign, no educational campaign, no persuasion is going to get me to change my behavior when I have 3 bags of recycling that do not fit in my recycling can, and the wind blows at my house sometimes 60 miles an hour or 100, and it blows my cans over. I can't be having my recycling sitting out. It has to go in a can. So what do we do? How do we think about this? One of the things to understand is that this multi-level thing can be an opportunity rather than just a frustration and a struggle. So I'm going to tell you the story of a school district and how they reduced electricity use in one school by 50% and got 75% of all of their buildings into the Energy Star labeling category, which is the top 25% of performance, right? 75% of their school buildings perform in the top 25%. So how do they do it? They do it by integrating changes across all the levels so that a change that's made in one spot and one layer of the rainbow influences changes in the other. So they started with operations getting permission from the superintendent to use money that the schools save on energy and to give it back to them. So operations keeps half of it and puts it in their fund for energy conserving recycling. Like renovations and improving efforts, and then the other half they give back to schools. The schools that they give it back to, if the school just tucks it in their general fund and nobody sees it, nothing happens, and it doesn't spiral up. But one school, the school that reduced its electricity consumption by 50%, gave that money to the science teacher who sponsored the environmental team. And that group of kids said, what should we do with this? And they said, hey, let's do something more for the environment with it. So they went back to the energy manager and they said, can we buy wind power with our savings? Because wind power at that time cost more money. This was back in 2007. And he said, sure, I can buy a block of wind power from the utility. And the kids said, and can we do it in April, please? Because that's when Earth Day is, and we'd like to do education around it. So now that school buys wind power every April, and it pays for all of their electricity needs in April and May, and it's part of their educational curriculum for Earth Day, so that all of the work that they do feeds into the other, so that they've built and encouraged a team of champions among kids. The kids are influencing each other. The kids are modeling behavior for others. They are producing videos about the impact of their work, and all of that goes back into the pockets of the school district in savings, which they share back with kids. And so all of the places that I have studied that make transformational change, they do it not because they have one strategy, but because they have many across the spectrum, and each of them is thought of and supporting the others. And this takes us back to the social-ecological model, because that's what public health has always said. If you want to quit smoking, you can't just have a quit line for individuals, you also have to have policy, and you have to have supportive social relationships. So the same thing is true for any other technology we want to implement, or new solutions, or areas for change. We need this integrative approach. So now you know the idea behind it. I want you to think about all the knowledge from 12 fields of social science while you're doing your work, but how do we begin? So this is how Dean set me up. This is my bike. Oh, back. This is my bike, Ruby. I want you to notice that Ruby began her life as a mountain bike, but she's been converted into a single speed by my loving husband, who gave her red pedals, red water bottle cages, red handles, red brake cables, and red gear, red chain, because, you know, red's my favorite color. So how do we begin? This is one version of the social process of creating change. It's kind of similar to what people talk about when they talk about community-based social marketing. It's really the systems design process. I have a version that has 12 steps, I have a version that has 4. It all depends on how much complexity you want. But there's basically 2 phases that we need to think about. Too many problems fail because they start with what they believe is a solution. They start with solutions rather than understanding the problem, which is what Dean just helped us explore and really look at. So we're gonna talk about this a little bit more. Okay, design thinking. How many of you have been seen or heard about the design thinking double diamond? So not just design thinking, but the double diamond. Okay, not too many of you. The thing to know about the double diamond is that human beings have a deep flaw, and that is their ability to engage in divergent thinking, which is sharing unique and different knowledge, which was the point of the exercise that Dean just had us do. We all had different sets of knowledge, and to come up with a solution, we needed to share all of it. When human beings come together and brainstorm, are looking for innovation, are looking for solutions, we are much more comfortable gathering with people that we know and talking about the ideas that we share, rather than spending time diving into the variety and the messiness of all of the possible ideas and solutions. So if we're gonna be innovative, we have to spend time in this phase called divergence. For you at all of your centers, my #1 recommendation is that you bring in an outside facilitator for you with your large groups to spend time in that divergent zone. And I can send you some references. I think there's one at the end of the presentation. So it's called the double diamond because you do it twice. The first set of divergence is understanding the problem, which is what happened when, what's his name? Thomas? Doug? Doug. Which is what happened when Doug Dietz went to the hospital. He did this first thing, observations. Now I'm gonna just refine what Dean told us. Dean said you gotta go out there and talk to people. The anthropologist in me says it is not enough to talk to people. You must observe them, because if you ask them how things are going, they will lie. My favorite example is about people trying to design pharmaceutical bottles. And they asked this nice old German woman if she was having any troubles opening her pharmacy bottles. And she said, no problems. And they said, okay, great, but they didn't trust her. Talking to her was not enough. They said, would you please show us how you open them? And she said, oh, come with me. They were sitting in the living room. Come with me. And she took them into the kitchen, whereupon she showed them her industrial-grade meat slicer and how she used it to cut off the caps of her pharmacy bottles. So the story tells us how deeply we cannot trust what people say. You have to observe them. And when Doug watched the little girl being dragged into the MRI, he understood in a new way the real problem with his machine and his design. So the point here, observations are essential. This story is about bikes. Shimano was thinking, hey, what's the latest components that people need? What's the next best thing? And they did really good design thinking. They went out and they observed their stakeholders, and this is what they found: garages with broken bikes. So from observing that and observing the patterns, 90% of kids who have bikes ride them. 90% of adults rode bikes as children, but don't currently have a working bike. So what's the gap? The gap is that these bikes require maintenance. They get flats, their gears get broken, they're trouble. That's why I showed you Ruby, because Ruby is a better design. Ruby is a single speed. This is another bike I own. This is the bike I bought myself for tenure, when I got tenure. And this has a fancy Shimano component in the hub. You'll notice that this looks kind of like a single speed too. It has a chain protector because there's no derailleur and the chain doesn't have to move, but it does have gears. They're internal. And it has these really beefy tires, so it almost never gets a flat. So this evolution of the cruiser bike was Shimano and the bike industry's understanding and answer that bikes should be fun and comfortable, not just high performance, and they should be easy to maintain. And when we understand that that's the problem, why bikes are lying derelict in our garages, then we can have elegant and innovative solutions that get us all back on our bikes again. So now I'm going to share a quick cautionary tale. So that was the first step. The first step is do design thinking and don't skip all of that important stuff in the discovery phase. The second point is you got to actually listen to the social scientists. If you're going to ask them to be on your project, you have to do what they say. Because if you don't, then you'll fail. So this is the Fort Zed Community Energy Challenge that was initiated by a bunch of engineers and do-gooders and well-meaners in my community, and they wanted to improve residential energy conservation, and they created this really cool checklist that has, at the top, the beginner pledge, at the middle, the intermediate pledge, and at the bottom, the advanced pledge. And this pledge sheet won a design award because it looks cool, and it's 3 clear buckets. But when we focus grouped it with people, half my community said, this turns me off because everything in that advanced bucket is buy solar panels, pay for insulation. And so renters said, this sheet doesn't talk to me. Audience segmentation is a best practice. It's been around for decades. When we told them they needed to change it, and they needed at least 2, a renter's version and an everybody version, but we think they could get a version that talked to both groups, they would have to redesign it. They said, well, no, we've already spent the money and we don't want to redesign it. And we said, well, okay, you're not going to talk to half the people you care about. So that was their first mistake. Then their second was this. They designed a program that is based on what we know is an evidence-based strategy. It's called the Block Leader Program. And there are dozens of block leader programs that have effectively improved sustainability behaviors across the world. But they're based on some fundamental principles from a variety of social sciences, and this group did not do them. So the evidence-based strategy is that leaders recruit their peers. In this one, people got the check sheet and they went to the website and they signed up individually. Then they got assigned to a block leader who may or may not have held any kind of meaningful community interaction. So there wasn't any education. We know that making goals and commitments improves people's adherence to any kind of change effort. And they did have a check sheet, but people checked it off privately on a website where they could never revisit their own checklist. So not only was it not public, it was not even available to them after the fact. We know that peer modeling and influence and social norms are some of the most important leverage tools, and they didn't use them. So the moral of this story is that if you do it wrong and you fail to use social science, and there is clearly established social science, you not only don't meet your goals, and this program had no effect on residential energy conservation in my community, by the way, but worse than that, it backtracks people's sense that they have the capacity to make change. So now everyone in my community is more reticent and more hesitant to launch another strategy, to engage in a strategy, or to even make the effort. So the risk of not using design thinking, of not understanding your audience, and of not using the social science knowledge about effective strategies is not just that you will fail, but that you will take 2 steps backwards. So let's go back. This wheel of change. When you skip the steps, you are going to fail. And I've worked on too many projects. I don't have a single example of people that have skipped all these steps and not made it, but this is the pain point. Most communities come to me, whether they are governments or nonprofits or organizations or universities, they come to me and they say that they need to get to broad-scale implementation right now. And if I don't get to broad-scale implementation this year, I can't afford to do any work. So this is one of the big pieces of knowledge from design thinking, is that getting to the solution is something that you do after rounds and rounds of design and innovation and trial. And so any project that you're working on, if you can ask people to back up on this and actually spend the time in that first half of the double diamond, you will ensure much greater success. So let's think about a path forward for water conservation. This is a big issue. I live in the West. We never have enough water. The Colorado is basically dry when it, runs out. So what do we do about that? How do we help it? So returning to the double diamond, the first thing we need to think about is what really is the problem. If water conservation is our big issue, we're concerned about increasing demand and decreasing sources in different places. Do we know for sure what the problem is, or should we actually spend some time in this first double diamond redesigning what really is the thing that we're after before we start picking solutions? So if we're attending to the first part of the double diamond, which are these steps, we are doing background information, we are really thinking about behaviors based on impact, and really understanding barriers and benefits. So the way to do that, as I've said, is not just to talk to people, but to observe them. We have in this country invested millions of dollars in observations about natural systems. We have spent much less investment and trained many fewer people in observations of the social realm and of social networks and of the built environment. And if we are going to come up with solutions in these engineering resource centers, we must be doing observations in all of these realms. All of the components of space are what is required for us to make change. So if we assess potential impact, let's just say, where's residential water use going? 50% of it in California is going into outdoor spaces. So our greatest opportunity to have an impact is water conservation programs that are focused on the out of doors. This is an easy, simple choice. Step 2, biggest opportunity for changes in outdoor water use. So then we have to attend to, though, what are the barriers and benefits of getting people to use less water in their lawns? My students interviewed people about this, and people just said, wow, it's overwhelming. If I want to do something different than mow the lawn that's already there, I have to think about a plan, and I have to make decisions. And then I don't know if I'm making good decisions. And that's just a lot of work. I can't handle it. Then some of us, you might have one of these, or maybe someone in your family is one of these. My friend Tom calls them the lawn Nazis. You know, they come talk to you if you have dandelions blowing in the breeze that might contaminate their lawn. The guy in my neighborhood mows his lawn in an arid climate twice a week to keep it super short. So people have to overcome their inertia And a whole bunch of great thinkers that are interdisciplinary teams have been creating programs to improve outdoor water use. And they start by overcoming inertia by ripping out people's grass. Yep. And once your grass is gone, then you're over that first barrier, which is like, what do I do? You're like, now I got to do something. My lawn is gone. So if we just look at how much water is being used, here's just another diagram that makes it tangible to people. People are spending 57 gallons a day. This is their per capita water use, not day. This is per capita water use for the year, right? So 57 gallons is the amount that we're using basically on average per person in California. So 57 gallons, do I really want to do that in a water-constrained environment? So the opportunity for water conservation, the biggest opportunity is on our lawns, and there's a lot of opportunity for that. So some of the programs that are successful are called Cash for Grass, and they begin by eliminating that very first barrier, people's inertia. People commit to removing a certain amount of their lawn, and that's their first step. They get into the program, they make a square footage commitment, and then they pay to have that lawn ripped out. So people don't have to do the work of ripping out their lawn, someone just comes and does it for you. So once your lawn is removed, now you have to make a change. And then they increase the benefits. So improving the benefits also helps people make change. So giving people garden plans and doing workshops and hosting neighborhood interactions, some of the most effective residential programs in the country use the block leader concept where people are actually interacting with, teaching and role modeling for their neighbors what can be done. So going back to the social-ecological model, if we think about all these layers from the individual up to policies and markets, if we want to remove lawns in the US as a strategy for improving water consumption, reducing pesticide and fertilizer use that is, in part contributing to the dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico, if those are outcomes that we care about, we have to engage in strategies on all of these levels, from policy to the individual. So municipal policies make a difference for recycling, for water conservation, for pesticide use. The most successful programs in the world use municipal policy to tackle these things, but not by themselves, in conjunction with other things. Encouraging HOAs to adopt new policies that allow non-grass plantings in what Lauren Springer, the landscape designer from Colorado, calls the hell strip, which is that space between the sidewalk and the road. We shouldn't be watering it. We should put xeriscape plants that will live there naturally throughout the year. We also need organizations and markets to shift. A decade ago, there was no such thing as a native plant nursery, but there is now. Every nursery in my town has a section of native plants, and they are labeled, and there's a market, and there are young entrepreneurs across my state that are developing and growing and cultivating seeds and have their own nurseries just for native plants. So this movement is happening. We also need community engagement. We need workshops and courses and sharing. Those things don't work by themselves. They only work in collaboration with others. So I did a little network map of evidence-based tools that improved and reduced pesticide use on lawns in Canada, and this is the clustering of tools that were used. So financial incentives, social norms, building motivation, asking people to make commitment. All of this list of things are evidence-based strategies from social science, and every social program uses a cluster and network on them, never a single one. So if we want to remove turf, because we care about the environmental impacts from water to pesticides use, we have to think across all of these layers. And this is how we will find solutions, but only by using the process of design thinking and spending time in discovery and utilizing the knowledge from the social science that tells us what is the leverage point in each of these layers and what are the known and established social science tools at each of those. But most important, how do we think about them? How do they touch each other? How does the change in one layer affect the change in another? Thank you.